welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Cheers.
What are you drinking?
I am drinking Smoke Wagon straight bourbon whiskey. I have it right next to me in case I need some handy refills. But
Sure.
I usually mix up pretty much every single time I go to get bourbon. I try to get a new one, and so this is a new one out of Las Vegas for me. It's
How's
delicious.
that treating
It's
you?
just it's good. I just have it on ice, and it's perfect. Good sipping one.
Good.
What about you? What are you drinking?
I am drinking a hot toddy actually because I'm
Oh,
still not over the sickness I've had I'm coming out of it, but it's been 2 weeks.
it's a good medicinal beverage.
Exactly. Maybe a little heavy-handed on the bourbon, but what can you do? So, okay, we're gonna talk shop. We're gonna talk photography, which I'm excited about because I actually don't know. First of all, I don't know a ton of photographers. And secondly, I don't know much at all about photography. So, all right, where'd that come from? Where's the passion for photography come from?
Well, I definitely have always been a visual person and have enjoyed art. I think pretty much from a young age, but photography really came about from my first news job at the Ottawa Herald, and it was kind of out of necessity for the newsroom that you just be well versed in kind of a utilitarian sort of or a utility player, I should say, and you have to capture your photos of your assignments and stuff. But I guess I kind of had a little bit of an eye for it, and I got some compliments on it, and the opportunity came about where the newspaper was willing to pay for me to take a photography class.
Nice.
And it was just a day class, and that just laid so much foundational knowledge, learning some of the basic concepts of an exposure triangle, which is a really helpful diagram for any photographer that's just getting into it, just the principles of that. But yeah, I mean, it kind of took off from there. So I started shooting sports for them occasionally, and did various. Sorry, my dog's lapping up water right now. But just did a lot of random assignments that entailed I do photography. So tried to get more and more creative, and I was always drawn to people, independent artists that made it a living, that they could be a photographer or a visual storyteller, because I've also always pretty much at the same time started getting more serious into video, and in college I was a little bit more into video storytelling. So I just kind of took off from there, and it really started going in a little bit of a different direction with my wildlife and nature photography about 5 or 6 years ago, and
Nice.
And that's still what I'm doing today.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to get back into that. So early on, or I mean, even if it's still the same answer, what were some of your early examples of like, okay, I want to shoot something like that? Did you have anybody that inspired you that way? I mean, you said you did, but like anybody that you still are inspired by?
Yeah. I mean, I always have loved National Geographic, and have always just been so struck by their images of not only just wildlife, but they have some of the best portrait photographers in the world, hands down. And there's been some images that my grandparents were world travelers, and my grandma was a photographer and an artist, and they just went all over the world, and they'd come back with these incredible stories and images, but they also loved Nat Geo, and they just had this enormous collection of Nat Geo. So I remember looking at those when I was younger. And in terms of particular artists or photographers, Paul Nicklin of Nat Geo, he's more of an Arctic photographer, but he does quite a bit. He's in Canada. Incredible wildlife and landscape photography. and for me, there's always been a bit of a crossover of environmental storytelling and conservation with what I want to do with my wildlife photography. And I think Paul Nicklin does an incredible job of creating beautiful images that mean something and that encourage people to take ownership and encourage people to get involved with his storytelling. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure he has a biology background, but I've always found him very inspiring. In the last few years, Ansel Adams, who is of course like arguably the most well-known photographer. I gotta admit, I never really like explored his work that thoroughly. But a friend of mine gave me a book, and just looking through some of his early works in the 20s and 30s, it is just striking how modern and contemporary. If you could take any of those images and put them in the Met, and I think people would probably think it was a contemporary photographer. The way that he used shadow and light to create drama was really cool. But also compositionally, it was, at the time, I imagine people thought his photographs were weird and out of place, and didn't, just like thought it was strange that why would you photograph that wall with a shadow, and like, I don't know. So he's also, I love looking through that book. But yeah, I mean, those, and I think still some landscape artists too, painters that I try to think of, like Benton, Thomas Hart Benton is I've always loved his work, and you can't capture that kind of stuff with a camera, of course, but I think he created so many beautiful landscapes. Berger Sanzin is another landscape artist, I should say, painter and artist, but did a lot of landscapes, and I guess relatively well known, maybe in Kansas and Missouri, but I think he has some famous pieces. But yeah, so try to draw inspiration from other things.
No, I mean that's great. Best artists do.
Yeah.
All right, so 5 or 6 years ago, so how was the transition from shooting for papers and whatnot, businesses, and shifting towards wildlife, like as far as your approach?
Yeah. Well, it was a little bit of a journey, obviously, to get there. After my time with newspapers, went to a digital publication, Startland, which I know you know, but it's a digital magazine that covers entrepreneurs in Kansas City. So that entailed a fair bit of portrait work and photographing people, but we also did quite a few video stories and tried to get creative with multimedia storytelling. And it was, I want to say it was 2016 that I went on my first extended backpacking trip with a group of friends, and decided to lug out my DSLR with 2 lenses, and I was mightily inexperienced, just generally speaking. So tacking on an extra, 15 pounds of camera equipment was obviously a great idea, especially in the desert. We went to Zion, and yeah, I mean, at that point, I just kind of knew I was hooked to being isolated in nature and capturing the beauty as best I could. Even still, like, even though I try to capture what I see on these backpacking trips when I go out, it's still so difficult to be able to capture the feeling of being out there, which is what I try to communicate, is how special these places are. And I put a lot of meaning, obviously, into getting out into nature and into being yeah, like I said, isolated and like I think there's just something that's like really grounding for me, and rejuvenating for sure. Just there's not an option to not have, there's not an option because there's no internet, there's no distractions.
Right.
It's just like you're 20 miles from your car and you these are the circumstances that you're in, so enjoy it. But yeah, that backpacking trip was definitely a big catalyst, and so since then, gone on at least another 15 backpacking trips, all with my camera, sometimes with multiple cameras. And the projects have changed within that storytelling. Some of my photography I sell at like art markets and farmers markets and stuff, and that's mostly national parks oriented.
Okay.
So we kind of orient that, and that brand is called the Wild Lens.
Wild
And
Lens.
the Wild Lens.
Gotcha.
And the mission of that is to basically raise awareness and funds for public lands in the United States. We are very fortunate in this country to have a large, expansive public lands apparatus, from national parks to national monuments and anything in between. And I don't think a lot of people know that richness that we have, and so try to acquaint them with it, but also what we talk to customers about is just conservation issues. We do a little national parks quiz with them as well, just kind of quiz them on basic things, and they can win a postcard or whatever. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and that's so much like just being out there and talking with people in Colorado. Obviously, like pretty much everyone that we interact with is a hiker or outdoor enthusiast, right, in some capacity. So just exchanging stories on the trail, or like where they've seen some wildlife or what their favorite national park is great. But we've been able to raise a fair amount of funds. It's been about $800
nice,
for the National Parks Conservation Association. And just talking with people about that, they have a pretty successful legal defense fund that helped stall or stop a lot of projects that would have an impact on public lands and national parks. So I always like to note them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then some of the other stuff is within wildlife and nature has been did some storytelling for a trail building organization here in Fort Collins called Wildlands Restoration Volunteers. And so they do trail building projects or trail restoration projects, or environmental restoration projects all throughout Colorado. And excuse me, that was a blast. Definitely want to do that some more this summer. But bringing out the camera and kind of documenting a little bit of the work that goes into building the trails that so many walk on and probably take for granted. But right. Yeah, so it's been a zigzag for sure, and it's still zagging as I speak. Thanks to COVID mostly, but yeah.
I was gonna say, I imagine that probably stalled a few projects.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the markets all last summer, for the most part, were shut down or severely limited in capacity. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense for me as a craft vendor to invest this money to not know if we'd even be able to have a market. So we did very little in terms of like physical sales and I say we, my partner Hannah and I do these markets. But steadily building the online presence, that's certainly a challenge in terms of like trying to connect with people that want fine art photography online as you might imagine, there's
Yeah.
a couple of landscape photographers doing that.
Right. Yeah.
And ones that have been doing it for much longer than I have. So standing out is an evolving challenge, but that was part of the evolution with Bobby Burch Photography, which is kind of just my catch-all photography. So portraits, family shoots, done a few weddings, but I don't think I'm going to do weddings again.
Oh wow, really?
I know that's how a lot of photographers make their living, but they can be stressful endeavors for sure. So there's that aspect of it, of my photography, and the passion is definitely in wildlife. And if I could, make a living doing that
That's where you live.
exclusively, yeah, that's definitely what I'd love to do. So.
I get it. All right, that makes sense. What
Yeah.
all right, so of the different trips and the different places you go, what's the furthest you've gone for shots? So you're in
Probably
Colorado
Vietnam.
now, so
Yeah. Fort Collins, Colorado now. Vietnam would be the farthest one.
That's pretty far.
Yeah. So we did, it was shortly before the pandemic. We went in November. Man, years are challenging now.
Sure.
We went in November into October into November of 2019. And we were there for about 2 weeks, and just absolutely incredible. Couldn't recommend it more to anybody. It was, I'm one that, like, I kind of like culture shock. I like being in a place that I'm like wholly unfamiliar and alien, like just the outsider. Like I feel like that, especially as a white male, like I feel like these are experiences that I need to have and should have. But
right.
It was so cool, and the people there were just so kind, and the landscape was breathtaking, and pretty much around every corner. And they have a pretty great park system themselves.
Really?
Yeah. So we did about 7 days, well, more like 8-9 days in the north, including in the mountains of in the Sapa region, and that's just breathtaking. Like all the kind of ridiculous images of rice paddies, like that go on for miles and miles.
Yeah.
Those were abundant there, and it was just ridiculous scenery. We were just so struck, and that's probably been the farthest. Argentina was pretty far as well. I mean, there's so many other places on the list. Lord of the Rings has been a big influence for me. So New Zealand is very high on the list in terms of locales to photograph. But maybe even before New Zealand, Africa I'd love to go to Tanzania and or Zambia. South Africa would be amazing as well. But I think of the wildlife opportunities there, and I'll probably need to take out a loan to buy equipment for all that I want. But
yeah. So when you go to these locales, do you have shots in mind, or do you just go and like whatever captures your fancy, that's what you're going to shoot?
I try to. It's evolved. That process has evolved for me over time. I would say initially, as I was going out into nature, I was very mindful of like not missing something and like being vigilant of images. Now it's more, I'm definitely more present to the environment and kind of what I see. And there's times of day that I prioritize the photography, because I don't want the whole experience to be like, this whole backpacking trip is to get photos. because it's not just that for me. It's also about like being present and being in nature, and enjoying the hike. And it's funny, like I'll go with groups of my main backpacking group, and there'll be times when none of us speak for 2-3 hours, and
Right.
we're just kind of in our zone, enjoying the surroundings. But there definitely are times when like my process in terms of scouting locations has changed, and just trying to identify where a good shot might be. So sometimes they'll be like, oh, that is a beautiful mountain, I want to get it. It's eastern facing, so I want to be there in the morning and get the sunlight as it hits it. But so there's some degree of that, but oftentimes it's just like, let's go on a backpacking trip, and I love the mountains, so it's like there's going to be, I'm pretty assured to have beauty out there wherever.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, and for me, like morning shooting is my favorite for sure. I just like morning light the most. Sunsets are fine, but morning light to me is just so beautiful. So yeah.
Nice. So so is it mostly, it sounds like anyway, that it's mostly like landscapes or what you're mostly trying to shoot, more so than say wildlife?
I would say, I guess yeah, with wildlife, there's a bit more of an intention. So like if I am, for instance, the elk rut in autumn, like there's been plenty of times when I've woken up, like 4 a.m. to get out pre-dawn to set up near where
Right.
some groups of elk are, or, and this shot's still been elusive for me, but the ram rut, the bighorn sheep rut, and trying to get some jousting between males, like that's still a shot that I haven't been able to capture yet. So there definitely is like more diligent planning in terms of that, and like scouting out forums, and like checking Instagram, seeing where people are posting, or if they, like if there's any detail on where these animals may have been. So you got to kind of look around to try to get a map in your head. But it's so much of wildlife photography is timing and luck. And
Right. Yeah. That
I mean,
makes,
there's certain, and that's not to diminish the skill that it takes, and of all the photographers that I love and admire. But I think they'd say the same thing, is that it's like, you can't control where a moose is going to be
yeah.
at sunset, like that.
Right.
Like that's why it's like so many of these, amazing photographers that we're familiar with or see their work, is like they put in so much time, so much effort and resources into capturing that image that you see on the page. It literally could have been over 2 months of work for them to get that image that is on the page that you're looking at. So yeah, but I would say, in terms of like the sales that I have, with markets and whatnot, it is often landscape oriented. People usually have some sort of attachment to it, to the photograph, or like have some memory,
Right.
or maybe they were struck by it, by the image itself, or they know they won't be able to climb that mountain, and so they want something of it. But yeah, I would say it's a lot of landscape for sure. Although the Yellowstone trip that I recently went on, about, well, it was Valentine's Day weekend, that was wildlife overload. That was that was awesome.
Yeah.
It was so fun. But
Amazing. What's been your, okay, had two thoughts. What's been the toughest shot that you've pulled off? Like you got it. You
yeah.
envisioned it, whether in the moment or planning ahead, and you got
Mm-hmm.
it. What was the toughest one?
Man, there were two kind of come to mind. So one of them was in Death Valley, and it was my friend and I went in January in Death Valley, and as you might know, Death Valley is incredibly hot, but it is also incredibly cold.
Right.
So we were out at night, and it was below zero, and I wanted to get a star trail image, which entails a decent amount of time outside the tent. So that was physically challenging. I mean, like, my water bladder froze that night. my hose on my water bladder froze, and the water bladder. That my boots are really stiff-soled boots, and during the day it was like 80 degrees, so I was sweating, and then like my boots got sweaty. They were like frozen stiff, so I had to we basically had to make breakfast while we're like sitting like geese on our gear, trying to warm it up so it's pliable enough to right. put on, and so that one was challenging. Another one, I'm just gonna grab the canvas because it's right next to me. This one is, let's see if you can see it.
Oh, so wow, yeah.
So this is in the Never Summer Range in Colorado. And this is a little bit of just dumbness on my part, but to get that image, it entailed that I snowshoe through like very deep snow, like 5+ foot of snow. And I got up into this area, and it was just incredible light. The clouds were moving so rapidly. It felt like a strobe light. But little did I know, after coming back, that area was in like an avalanche risk.
Oh, so, wow.
I don't know if that like qualifies as like a hard thing as much as like or challenging thing as much as a stupid thing on my part. I've definitely taken avalanche stuff more seriously after that occasion. So I did a course this winter just to try to get some of the basics of it. But I'm trying to think of other ones that have been challenging. I mean, there's been plenty of times where like fallen into a river. I did during an elk shoot recently. I broke a $1,500 lens.
Oh, wow.
Which was heartbreaking.
Yeah, sure.
So it's like losing, like I dropped a child or something. But yeah, no, I mean, as I like to say, it's like always worth the sweat. It's always worth the effort. Like, yeah. Like bringing out the equipment for me is such a fun part of being out there, and so it's always worth the sweat and the effort. Fortunately, there haven't been any serious complications or anything along the way. Never had any aggressive, knock on wood, haven't had any aggressive animals. We did see a wolf in Yellowstone, but we were like a quarter mile away. Yeah. So fortunate for that.
Yeah. So what's your, you may have answered this too, because you mentioned the rams not getting that shot yet, but what's your white whale? What's your current on the hunt for?
The list is ever growing. One that has been on there probably the longest.
There you go.
Is Musk Oxen, and going into northern Canada or Alaska for some Musk Oxen photos. Musk Oxen, I don't know if you're familiar with them. They basically are like really woolly cattle, and they have this kind of like ornate horn arrangement.
Yeah.
They kind of, I'm almost certain that George Lucas drew some inspiration from them,
for the
with some creatures, and if not Chewbacca, potentially some. I think it's a banthas. I want to say is their name.
That's what what if it's what I'm thinking of, then that's what it looks most like from Star Wars.
Yeah. So Musk Oxen are definitely on there. One that I added recently in this shot would just be like insane to get. You have to invest a lot of money to making this a reality. But an Arabian oryx. I've seen this animal before, but seeing it in a documentary recently, it was like, holy crap, that is a beautiful animal.
Wow.
They're kind of like impalas, but yeah, South America, beautiful rack that just shoots straight upwards like 2 or 3 feet. And yeah, they're in the desert, so you'd have a very stark background with this like beautiful animal. So that's definitely on the list. Definitely still want to get grizzly bears. I mean, there's so many animals for sure. But yeah, those are just some of them for sure.
That'd be some sweet pictures.
Yeah,
I can see why.
There's probably some landscapes on there too that, I mean, I love getting shots on top of mountains, looking down on other mountains, particularly in the morning. So there's countless photos of that I'd love to get, but yeah,
it's a cool bucket list.
Yep.
Well, we're running out of time here. Where can everybody find you and your work to check you out?
Yeah. So on Instagram, you can check me out on Bobby Burch Photography, or you can check out my website, wildlens.co, lens, LENS, wildlens.co. Those would probably be the 2 main ways, or you can check out Bobby Burch Photography. That's kind of more my general portfolio of work. But yeah, I mean, thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. I'll put everything down below so everybody can click the links. But awesome. Meantime, thanks for having a drink with me, man.
Cheers. Thanks, man.
We'll see you later. And that wraps up our visit. Remember, if you'd like to get together, just reach out. We'll put something on the books. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, do all the things down below. Till next time.